Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. Good afternoon for those in Europe, and to some others, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for the conference titled, Oh My Gosh, Men and Vulnerabilities. We have an exciting lineup of 4 great speakers for you today. I'm Jackson Tan, your host for today's conference. I'm an entrepreneur, a wellness advocate, a coach, and a mentor, and I'm currently based out from the beautiful island of Koh Samui in Thailand. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Life Coach University for organizing this conference. It is a platform where a group of coaches come together to share their greatness by coaching online for the benefit of all. And if you have benefit from the talks, and we welcome you to join us in the regular talks, all you need to do is just pay it forward or do something good for the others. Now, back to today's conference of, oh my gosh, men and vulnerabilities. As I've said, we have 4 great speakers lined up for today. It's going to go on for about an hour and a half. During the conference, if you do have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box and we will get to them somewhere in maybe the last 20 minutes. All right, so let's get going. And I'm going to bring on our first speaker, Mr. Joon Kim. So just bear with me while I bring him up as a panelist. All right, so welcome, Joon. So let me introduce Joon. So Joon Kim is an educational consultant who helps students and their families make informed decisions on matters regarding education. He is the son of immigrant parents from South Korea, and he has been advising students from elementary to graduate students for over 24 years. His extensive experience, continuing professional education, and network ensures that he's up to date on all trends and information in the education field. His past students appreciate most about his balance of candor, truth, and encouragement. So today, Joon will share with us his take on what vulnerability means to him, followed by sharing more on how does one know when you're vulnerable. So Joon, please take it away. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jackson. And hello, everyone, wherever you may be. I'm here in California, so it's a little early, but super excited to be here. So, all right, let's get started. So what does a vulnerability mean? Well, first of all, I think Jackson said it best. He specifically said what it means to me, because I think vulnerability really is going to look different for each individual. And so I'm really excited to hear from my colleagues on the panel what it means to them, because I'm going to share with all of you what it means to me. The word vulnerability for me immediately conjures up one other single word, and that word is authenticity. So for me, vulnerability really means to be authentic. And there are so many other synonyms that capture the meaning of that word. Authenticity is being real. I think that's the colloquial expression that we frequently use to describe when we are being authentic, is to be real. What are some other words that some of us might use? It is to be genuine, right? I mean, these are words that we hear in other contexts, not just ourselves as people, but have a friend who recently got engaged. And so, of course, the fiance jokingly said, okay, is that diamond ring real? So being authentic. And what does it mean when something isn't authentic, right? Sometimes when we are talking about something, we're learning something, it's helpful to know what something is, but it's also helpful to know what something isn't. And so to be disingenuous, to not be authentic, is where oftentimes it's because we are trying to control the situation. I think if we're all honest, we all have some degree, some more than others, the need as well as the desire to be in control. I think that's something that is just very human nature to us. We are trying our best to control our lives, our situations. I mean, this is something that we do not need to learn. I have 3 children. I never, with my wife, had to teach our kids the desire to sort of control what they want to do. So, for example, like bedtime, right? They have their own ideas of when they want to go to bed. We, the parents, have our own ideas of when we think they should go to bed, or we know better than they do when they should go to bed. So vulnerability, it really is authenticity, is to be who we are without trying to control. And again, as I had shared with you just now, we all have some degree of innate desire to control. And so to be vulnerable is to let go of that control and to be authentic. And along with both of these qualities and characteristics, you know, for me, being vulnerable also means really opening myself up to criticisms. I'm in education, as Jackson shared, and a large part, if not the entire sort of enterprise of learning and education, rests on our ability to give feedback, but also for the students to receive feedback. Because if you have a teacher who's giving feedback, but you also have a student who does not take the feedback, whatever the teacher says, the student thinks the teacher doesn't know what they're talking about. And they just refuse to take any feedback. We know what the future for that student's going to look like. So to be vulnerable is to open yourself up to criticism, to be authentic, to be yourself without any desire, or at least trying our best to minimize our instinct to control. So that right there is my response for what vulnerability means to me. And I would love to say I do it every single day, but the truth is I am human as well. And so because it's scary, it is scary. And I look forward to hearing from my fellow colleagues here on the panel what vulnerability means to them. I know, well, how do you know you're being vulnerable? Right. So we know what it is, but sometimes we need a indication of when do we know. Is that because we don't have a like a biometric, so there isn't a biological indicator that tells us that we're being vulnerable. Although some people might, especially with us guys, we might say, well, you know, you're being vulnerable when you're crying. But you know, really, for the way I like to describe vulnerability, it's just discomfort. Definitely. I mean, it could come, and when we hear the word discomfort, we're not talking about pain, although it could be painful, right? You know, pain is just a very specific example of discomfort. You know, discomfort can even be for something positive. You know, I work with some students where they really struggle to receive praise and compliments. They start becoming really shy. They'll put their head down. When I begin to give maybe a small speech about how wonderful this particular student is, they don't know how to receive that. They put, like I said, they put their head down. They are no longer facing the audience if we are in front of a group. So discomfort is just feeling uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable, and that could be that could take so many different sort of forms. And so vulnerability, you know, you're being vulnerable when you are feeling that discomfort. And a word or a phrase, I should say, because it's 2 words, that I think might help all of us to kind of capture the essence of this is what I call emotional tsunami. When we start to experience a rush of so many different emotions, because I think we can all relate where there have been times where we were experiencing emotions. It could be magnitude or just the sheer quantitative, the amount of emotions that it was very difficult to process. And so, you're being vulnerable when you are experiencing a tsunami of different emotions. And I think another indication would be you're struggling to put it into nice, easy words. And I think we've all experienced that, right? I mean, we've sometimes said, I'm speechless, or I don't even know what to say. And part of that, I think, captures what that vulnerability is like. It is truly the coming of so many different emotions. Maybe it is just one emotion, but the intensity is so much that we struggle to put into words. So those are some of the things that came to my mind when I'm thinking about how do you know that you are being vulnerable. And so again, I bet even that is going to be very different for each person. But if you're being authentic, you allow your emotions to be processed. I think very oftentimes we try to avoid it maybe, or postpone and procrastinate. But those emotions will always be there, and we need to work through those things. And so I hope that answers the question, Jackson. I mean, I don't want to go on for too long here, just because I know that a great benefit of this event is to get the different perspectives from each of us, because men are just as different as men and women are different. So I look forward to hearing from others.
All right. Thank you, Joon. So I like it when you describe vulnerability being equals to authenticity, and especially so about this going against your natural instinct to control. Um, I also like the idea of how you use something very easy for us to feel that we are vulnerable, like this feeling of discomfort. And I like it. Usually people always talk about discomfort being negative, but even when you're receiving compliments, that's uncomfortable. And I guess a lot of people, especially from the Asian region, when you give them compliments, they sort of put their heads down and is feeling so shy about it. So okay, thank you very much, Joon. I will move you back to the audience, and I will head on and get Jay. Thanks a lot, and I will see you later. All right. Here comes Jay. Hi. Welcome, Jay. Right. Good morning, Jay. So let me introduce Jay. Jay is a certified high performance coach, a college professor, podcaster, a speaker, a trainer, and the founder of Do Hard Things Nation Apparel. Jay believes taking on complex challenges with persistence and commitment enables people to find great successes in life. He holds the rank of Major in the US Army and is a transitioning veteran with 27 years of service, both enlisted and as a commissioned officer. His mantra, do hard things, has enabled him to overcome many struggles in life. This shift in perspective allowed him to go from a directionless teenager who grew up in a fatherless home to a commissioned officer in the United States Army. So today, Jay will share with us what vulnerability means to him and how to get out of the frustrations and negative states of not dealing with your own vulnerability. So Jay, you have the stage now.
All right, well, I'm excited to be here. This is a fantastic topic. I love that we have a panel, a group of men talking about a topic that almost feels like it can be taboo, right? When I think about vulnerability, what comes to mind? When you think of the word, I always think of like a bunch of people holding hands in a circle, maybe crying about why their best friend hurt their feelings, right? It has like this negative connotation, like it's so wimpy, right? And especially as men. And when I think of what vulnerability actually is, I think it's being able to express your emotions freely. It's choosing not to hide your feelings. It's expressing what you're truly feeling what you want and what you desire from the world and other people. And it's like what Joon said, it's being authentic, unapologetically you. And when you're holding yourself back, I feel that you're not being truthful with other people. And as I look at my life, I'm gonna drop some vulnerability with you guys this morning. And I talk about this, and it took me a long time to come to this, to be able to do this. But about 10 years ago, being in the military, I had suffered in silence. I was a very good soldier, and I had led large organizations. But in the military, it's like, you stuff your emotions away and you just do the job. Well, I had some childhood trauma. I had some trauma that was issued to me by the United States Army from the experiences they sent me on. And I didn't learn how to handle some of those emotions very well. Emotions aren't something that we're really trained to deal with. And I got to a point where I got in a really deep depression, and I had the thoughts of suicide ideation. And it took me setting aside my pride and ego to ask for help before I really started to be able to overcome this. I couldn't fathom leaving my children behind without a father. And I've known it's a big problem in the military community. And I'm like, there's no way that I'm tapping out. I've got to figure this out. So I had to learn to be vulnerable and talk about some of the things that were holding me back. And some of the things that I learned is that we need to have an outlet to be able to express ourselves. If not, what happens is, just like you put a tea kettle on the stove, right? You pour water in it, you turn the heat up, starts to, you hear it kind of heating up, and then eventually the steam like blasts out of there and you hear the whistling sound. Well, if there were no outlet for that steam, what would happen to the pot? It would explode, right? Well, that's what happens to people when they bottle up their emotions. They don't let themselves out. They'll blow up like a pot without a way to let off that steam. And ultimately, when you're not being your true self, you're not congruent. And when you're not congruent, it doesn't feel good, because you're not living in alignment with who you are as a person. It's not letting people know who you truly are. And we as humans need to be able to connect with other people on a deeper, meaningful level, because that leads to ultimate fulfillment. And so why is this so hard? I talk about doing hard things. Why is sharing yourself so incredibly difficult? And I know as I've analyzed myself, like, why did it take me wanting to almost kill myself before I thought, hey, why don't I share myself more? What is going on here? Well, I think as a society, it starts with childhood. And it starts with domestic. We as humans, just like animals, have been domesticated. We've been domesticated in schools, by our parents, churches, sports teams. Sit down, shut up, sit up straight. And from the men perspective, it's like when you're on, I recall being on sports teams, it's like, shut up, quit crying, be a man, stop with the tears, man up. Stop being a mama's boy, quit being a sissy, be a man, right? So we're taught to like suppress our feelings. And then I know from my own personal experiences going into the military, there was more of the same, because it's a very alpha male dominated environment. And so it's been ingrained in us that if we show emotions, that we're somehow weak. And so what we have is we have this massive repression of what makes us humans, and it keeps us from connecting with others. And we need to be vulnerable in order to have deep and meaningful connections with other people. Another misstep that I've made in life is I've been divorced. And as I look back and analyze, what caused that, some people, you probably heard people, they'll bash their ex. Well, they were a lying, cheating, no good scumbag, like you had, like, it takes two people for a relationship. So it's not just one person, being the lying, cheating scumbag. You got to take some ownership in that, right? And so as I look back, anger, you start to peel back through. Well, you know what? There's a commonality in all the bad relationships that I had, in all of my relationships. The commonality was me, and I'm like, well, you know what? I probably wasn't as vulnerable, or did I express myself or my feelings as often as I should? And I still struggle with this. I still catch myself, but I'm far more aware of it than I used to be. And so is a combination of so many things in our society that keep us from being vulnerable. You're always hearing, you don't want to be controversial. Don't be unique. Don't do anything crazy. Don't do anything stupid. Don't be selfish. All of these things that keep us from expressing ourselves. And so the second point that I want to talk about is, how can you be more vulnerable, and how can you get out of the frustrations that are associated with being vulnerable, or the dichotomy of dealing with vulnerability? How do you know? How does someone else know when you're being vulnerable? Well, so here are a couple of things that you can do in your day-to-day life. The first thing, and I think Joon hit on this also earlier, is we need to expand our emotional vocabulary. This is something that I learned when if I were to ask you how you're feeling, or anyone how they're feeling, oftentimes sad, happy, mad, and that's about like the only feelings that they have. Well, if you look at Abraham Hicks' emotional scale, they're like 22 emotions that we can feel. And one of the things that's really helped me is to really identify on that scale, like, what emotion am I currently feeling? Why am I feeling that way? And how can I climb that ladder up a couple of feelings? Because you have more than mad, happy, or sad. It could be joy, it could be boredom, it could be grief, it could be gratitude. There's all these different emotions that you can feel. So we need to expand our emotional vocabulary and being able to understand where we're at on that. One of the tricks that I like to use to help me is reminding myself of my clarity words. And as a coach, what I have people do is I have them close their eyes for a minute and just think of three words that describe the best of who you are. These might be the words that would be etched on your tombstone. These are the words that would remind you of how to show up and serve. And just, if I were to ask your partner to describe you in three words, these would be the three words that you would be proud to have someone describe you as. Because we as humans don't often live up to our highest potential, and we need to be reminded of our three words. Mine are honest, disciplined, and encouraging. And honest, being on the topic of vulnerability, am I being honest with my true feelings? Despite hurting someone's feelings, am I being truly honest with who I am? And that enables me to be more vulnerable, to be my true self, is when I remind myself of my clarity words. And usually when I ask people what their clarity words, honesty is usually one of those words that often pop up. Another thing that you can do is just admit when you're not good at something. Oftentimes our pride or our ego kind of get in the way, and we tend to not want to show that we have any chinks in the armor, like we have no weakness, right? So but sometimes we're not good at everything. So that's another tip, is just be open that you're not good at something. And what happens is someone that is good at that, they love teaching, because that's their ability to contribute to you, to help you, show you what to do or how to improve. And then ultimately, finally, take ownership and responsibility when you misstep. We have shortfalls. We don't always show up on our A game. And sometimes, the ultimate power play is to take ownership of that, and then demonstrate what right looks like and how you're going to take control of the situation, as opposed to blaming someone else. So take ownership, take responsibility for things, even when they don't go well. And so those are some of the things. That's vulnerability, and then how to overcome some of the frustrations associated with vulnerability. And I'm excited to hear what the rest of the panel has to say about this topic.
Thank you, Jay. So what I picked up is Jay has just modeled in front of this live audience a big, strong Army veteran and man, and just showing and sharing with us his past and being so vulnerable. So I thank you for that. And I like the idea of us trying to expand our emotional vocabulary, because I think if we don't expand it, we are limited in how we can understand ourselves. So I like that a lot. And despite you sharing with us these vulnerability moments, I can still see that you have mentioned that it is a journey, and we still struggle with it sometime or the other. And I'm going to go and try to describe myself with three words that you have
awesome.
asked us to do. All right, very good. All right, so Jay, thank you very much. I'll move you back to the audience, and
Sounds
I
good.
will go get Bryan. Thank you very much. Here comes Bryan. Welcome, Bryan. So please allow me to introduce Bryan. So Bryan had spent the more than 30 years in the restaurant industry and ended up burnt out and unfulfilled. In the last 5 years or so, working in the personal development arena, he eventually narrowed in on the mindset side of things. He is fascinated with how the unconscious, or well, not the unconscious, how the conscious and the subconscious work together and how to change one's self-concept. He has been married to his wife, Sonia, for 22 years and have no kids, but 2 cats, and we might see the cat, just behind. So today, Bryan will share with us his own take on vulnerability, followed by what were the obstacles and barriers to opening and reaching out for help. So Bryan, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jackson. Jackson, it's good to see you again, and Joon as well. I loved it. And Jay, I have yet to meet Jay, so it was wonderful to see him. Yeah, I get to be vulnerable here with a man and his cat, and my other cat's wandering around over here too. So I loved it, and I'm going to piggyback on a couple of things that those guys said as well, and then elaborate on my own. So what does vulnerability mean to me? You know, my first thoughts when I was thinking about this, I was just questioning myself, you know, how vulnerable am I? Do I allow myself to be vulnerable and stuff like that? And so I started digging into my past. As a kid growing up, my dad was a very stoic individual, and he got that from my grandfather. My grandfather was really kind of like the I don't want to use the word oppressive grandfather, but he was very stern, very regulated. And so I think my dad picked up on that. And I think that living in an environment, my parents got divorced at a very young age. And so, you know, trying to look up to my dad with my stepmom around and stuff like that. And he didn't express his love and stuff like that. So I was very withdrawn as a kid. I know my brother and I hung around. So to me, being vulnerable is the ability to express your emotions. And I'm going to piggyback off of what Joon said, being authentic or genuine, right? But how do we know what's authentic or genuine to us unless we're able to start expressing some of those things? And I know as a kid, I wasn't able to like express myself. My expression of myself was, is this kid going to like me or not? Or is this other person going to like me or not? And so I started expressing things, and I'm going to use what Jay said too, is domesticated. Like we get pounded and pounded and pounded by society, what it means to be and the role that you play in it, right? And so it just becomes like, am I expressing myself authentically? And so, you know, I remember growing up, my stepsister and I, we used to love to sing and record ourselves back when you had to press both the record and the play button at the same time, singing these songs from the radio. And I remember I loved these female kind of like pop songs and stuff like that. There goes my cat. But that wasn't considered manly at the time. And so I remember trying to make sure that when I was singing these songs with my stepsister, that my other brothers weren't around to hear it, or my other friends weren't around. And so just that kind of like that inability to express that kind of, it shows up, right? It shows up in our relationships. It shows up in our lives in other ways. And, you know, for me later on in life, I was a very energetic kid. I'll put it that way. I got in a lot of trouble, and I ended up abusing alcohol and drugs for a long time. And that was one of my ways of a dual fold, right? One, being able to hide what my true expression of myself was and my own vulnerabilities. But at the same time, the alcohol gave me the inhibition. I was in the restaurant industry for 30 years. And so it gave me the ability to kind of be able to express myself in some of these ways and lose these inhibitions. and stuff. So, you know, what does vulnerability mean to me? Expressing your real emotions, whether they are like hurt and sad and things like that, come up to me the most, because that's like the side that we all want to hide, right? That like, oh, I can't cry, like boys don't cry and things like that. But I remember the biggest one for me was I never cried a lot. Uh, whether a friend's loved one passed away, or trying to show those compassionate emotions during those times. And I remember sitting there during movies, and I would look over at my wife and she'd be teared up, like it'd be a completely tearful moment in a movie. And I like, you know, that it's not wrong, let's say, but my instinct was, oh my God, I'm gonna cry. You gotta suppress it. You gotta suppress it. I'm not gonna do it. And I look over and there's my wife crying. And then I realized after I got older and stuff, was like, no, it's okay to cry. In fact, I want to release those, because all those pent up emotions and stuff were just causing me grief and causing me, you know, this shame and this guilt, and not being able to share my intimate feelings, especially with those close to me and stuff like that. So I think it's being able in those moments just to express who you are, and also express joy and love. Like for guys, you know, it's like the bromance thing, you know, like, oh, I love you, bro. I love you, bro. But to really look your friend, your best friend, who's another guy, and be able to say, you know, I love you, man. I really do. I love you. You know, you're a really good friend to me, and stuff like that. So that's what it means to be vulnerable to me, is to be able to express yourself honestly, openly, genuinely, and also be able to experience the emotions that come along with it, whether those emotions are comfortable or uncomfortable or not. But it's being able to experience those emotions at the same time and be okay with it, right? And be able to sit with the other people that you're around, and do that. So anyway, that's what vulnerability means to me. And the second part of this is, what were the obstacles or barriers to opening up or showing vulnerability, and reaching out for help? This was interesting to me, because I hid my stuff for so long behind that veil of alcohol and drugs, and I had this really wide range of humor, I'll put it that way. And so I used to use humor as this barrier to keep people away. I used to tell these really bad jokes and stuff like that, distasteful jokes. And being in the restaurant industry, if there's anybody out there, you probably understand. And I used to keep people away. But there's two things that come up for me when it comes to barriers, and that's internal and external. So the internal barriers, this would look like, you know, what are other people going to think of me? Does that make me look feminine? Or basically your ego and stuff, and having to connect and whatever it is with that other person in there, that internal barrier, that internal fight that's going on. Like for me, wanting to be okay with listening to like a female pop song that I enjoyed on the outside, but going, oh my God, what are the other guys going to think of me because I'm singing along to Mariah Carey or something, you know? And so there's this internal battle that goes on, right? But I think that internal battle is also based on of either a lower or not as strong of an emotional IQ. And I think, you know, Jay expressed this, where he had gotten, I think, suicidal and different things. In June, we talked about these things, but emotional IQ is something that's not taught. And I believe it's something that needs to be taught at a very young age, but not only taught to the kids that are growing up, so they understand. Because my grandfather and my dad and my stepmother and my mom, they were not taught emotional IQ. So they weren't taught how to express their emotions, and they passed how to deal with their emotions down to me, right? Which was either time out, or, you know, you just don't cry. You better shut up or I'll give you something to cry about, you know, that type of thing. And so I think we need to be able to expand on that and be able to express ourselves. So the adults need to learn it as well, as long as the children, in order for us to break that generational thing where we're not passing it down. The external thing that comes up for me as a barrier is it's going to come down to like families, society, and culture. I can only speak for the culture and the society and the families that I grew up in, but I'm sure that other cultures, whether it's Asian or Hispanic or whatever, we've all got our own ways of how we're supposed to be a man, so to speak, and stuff like that. And even just the statement, how to be a man, you know, I don't know. I just think that there's these barriers in there, and a lot of it has to do, like you're in school, you leave your families, and that you're experiencing your first interactions with other people, the other kids from the neighborhood or in school or whatever like that. And each one of those kids shows up with their own external barriers. And now we've got to all play and interact and get along, but we want to be liked. And so we start suppressing it at a very young age on who it means to be us. And so I think that those are the two biggest things that came up for me when it came to barriers. I know my own personal barriers were just I felt alienated from my family, but I know I did that myself just because I didn't want to experience the uncomfortable feelings of my parents getting divorced at a very young age, having a new brother and sister along with my brother, my real brother, and so I just kind of rebelled. I got in trouble, like you name it. I got in trouble. I got kicked out of every school. I got kicked off the bus. I got just, you name it. And so, you know, I had to fight my own personal demons when it came to it. I actually, when I got control of the alcohol and drugs and I started to get into the personal development and stuff like that, one of the coaches that I worked with was solely on tapping into my emotions, because I knew as a coach, in order for me to connect better, I had to be able to emotionally connect with people. And if I was distant or vacant with clients and stuff like that, I knew the connection wasn't going to be there. And so I just remember tapping into that and learning to get past my own things, like the criticisms and stuff, and especially like just admitting when you're wrong. That's so, like, I still, like, you know, right now, like my wife and I may be having an argument and I know I'm wrong. It takes me, sometimes it takes me a couple moments to go, yeah, I was wrong, and look at me like you want to hang your head low. But it becomes easier and easier the more you do it. So, you know, I appreciate the time here as well. I want to give it back to you, Jackson, and hear from the other panelists as well. I love this. This is an amazing thing. And I think this is, oh, here's one other thing I wanted to share. I saw this meme, it was yesterday or the day before, and I took a screenshot of it because a friend of mine posted this, and she's female and she's going through a very difficult time with drugs, emotional vulnerability and things. And this says, men cry, men break down, men suffer with eating disorders and body dysmorphia, men have suicidal thoughts, men die by suicide, men suffer with mental illness. It is not unmanly to struggle. We need to be encouraging men to speak out and not letting them suffer in silence. And I thought that spoke true volumes. I mean, that just brings a lot of emotions up for me. I just wanted to share that because it's out there and it needs to be expressed more. So thank you, Jackson, for this topic. This is amazing.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So it looks like there's a mention of being authentic, you know, that's this showing vulnerability. And I want to acknowledge you really also modeling being vulnerable here by sharing with all of us, you know, you abusing the use of alcohol and drugs and coming through it. And I hear you mention, you know, singing twice, once singing when you're young, and secondly listening to, you know, music played by or sung by a female. So it could be something in you, right, that's singing. And one thing I picked up, I think, especially for men, really going back to our childhood to find out what were the things that were said or we heard that got us to where we are today. I mean, even, you know, you mentioning about, you know, the bromance about yo bro, but really not having this deep connection to deliver it and look at your brother and say it with that feeling. I picked up these two things as that could be helpful to look into, being the internal barrier as well as the external barrier. So I think it will be good for the audience that if they can look into this, that will give them a indication or signal as to what those barriers could be in their journey to be more and more vulnerable, which will certainly help them. All right. So thanks, Bryan. I will move you back to the audience while I get Chris, our fourth speaker. Welcome, Chris. So please allow me to introduce Chris. So Chris is a life coach who works specifically with men on improving the quality of their relationships and therefore their entire lives. Chris shared that one of the key success factors is the ability and willingness to be vulnerable, which leads to deeper connections and stronger, healthier relationships. Today, Chris will share with us his own take on vulnerability and if that's something that can be trained. If yes, how? So Chris, I'll hand the stage to you now. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jackson. Thank you for having all of us on for this amazing topic. Thank you for creating this conference. It is such an important topic of conversation for everyone, men especially, I believe. So what does vulnerability mean to me? I think there are two major concepts, two major definitions, and I think this is what causes a lot of the confusion and then negative views of vulnerability as we're talking about it. But the first one is it is a weakness, right? That when you think of vulnerability in terms of maybe sports or military, like if you're vulnerable to attack or if your defense is vulnerable, then that is seen as a weakness, right? But that's a completely different definition or understanding of vulnerability than what we're talking about. The way we're talking about it, it's helpful to see it as a strength, or I think of it as a tool, right? Vulnerability is a tool that we have available to us to use as a way to open ourselves up, be more honest, like the other panelists have said, be more authentic, more sincere. So by being vulnerable, we're being real. We're sharing our truth, right? And so that makes us more relatable. It makes us more visible, more credible in the eyes of others. So it makes us feel more like safer for other people to connect and then for them to be honest. So it's a tool that we have to help ourselves and then to help others. And so I think it's something that it's this really positive, helpful thing. But yeah, it's also scary, right? All of these things, opening ourselves up, being completely honest about who we are and what we want, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is it takes a lot of courage, but it's something that helps us get more of what we want in life. It takes vulnerability to ask a person out on a date. It takes vulnerability to start a business or ask for a promotion, to go for what you want, because it takes a lot of courage to do that, because you're risking rejection, you're risking failure, you're risking ridicule, right? And so these are things that are uncomfortable, they're scary, and so we tend to avoid them, and so then we avoid being vulnerable, right? Well, I've had to be vulnerable throughout my life. Well, I've used vulnerability as a way to heal from past traumas. So when I was in high school, I not only lost my best friend, he died, but I was largely responsible for his death. And then I had close people soon after that die as well. So I suffered a series of traumas that were very serious, and that led to guilt and shame and depression and anxiety. And if I didn't share with others, if I didn't allow myself to be vulnerable, I'm afraid of what that might have led to for me. And so I had to, as a way to save myself, to heal. I went a stretch after that happened without getting the help. I got help by sharing with my friends and family. So being vulnerable in my closest relationships, that was helpful, but I was still resistant to getting professional help because I thought that was a sign of weakness. I thought, no, I don't need to get professional help. I got this. I'm strong enough. I have my friends and family, but it wasn't enough. So I had to open myself up to getting professional help to deal with these past traumas and all of the shame and the guilt and the depression and all of that. And I'm so glad that I did, because doing that changed my life. It helped me to heal, and not only while I was going through the therapy, but my therapist gave me tools that I can use to continue to work on myself for life. And that ultimately led to me pursuing my dreams of entrepreneurship, of teaching, of coaching. And so like vulnerability helped me get to where I am today. It's really strengthened my personal relationships, none more so than the relationship I have with my girlfriend of almost 12 years. And I think without being vulnerable, that probably would have ended by now. And so the vulnerability is courage, right? To go after what we really want, and to be our true selves. So that's what it means to me. And then the second part is like, is vulnerability something that we can learn or develop? And then if so, how, right? Like, yes, absolutely. This is something that it's not a case of you're either born with it or you don't have it, right? Now, this is a skill, something that we can learn. And I'll go through some steps that you can take to actually increase your ability to be vulnerable and have it be a useful tool for you in your life. So one is change your perspective on it. If you're viewing vulnerability as something that means you're weak, and that you're viewing it as this negative thing because of what it means in sports and war, maybe, I encourage you to change your perspective completely. See vulnerability as a tool that you can use to go after more of what you want, that being closer relationships, a career change, a business, whatever it is in life that you want. You want stronger relationships with your buddies, with your wife, your girlfriend, your kids, your extended family. All of that takes vulnerability. So know that there's a lot of loneliness in the world right now, especially with men, and I think that's because men have such a hard time with vulnerability. We have a hard time opening up to other men and expressing our deep gratitude and admiration and love for them. And so we don't feel this connection because we're afraid to be that honest with each other about these types of feelings. And then it keeps a distance between us. So, all right. So the first thing is change your perspective, and then know that you can handle whatever it is you're afraid of. Like you're afraid to go after asking that person out, or asking that other, maybe that guy to hang out and become friends. You're afraid of the rejection, the failure, maybe, you think people are going to say things about you behind your back or on social media or something. Know that whatever it is, even if that negative thing happens, you can handle it. Right? These are not life-threatening things. These are like your ego thinks it is, but it's not. These things are situations that you can absolutely handle, right? And even grow stronger from having experience in them. Another thing is think about what you might be losing out on by not being vulnerable. If there's somebody that you want to have a closer relationship with, but you're too scared to put yourself out there because you think you might get rejected, well, now you're not going to get to have that experience, right? You're not going to get to have that relationship. Or if you want to start a business, or if you want a promotion, if you're not willing to take that risk, then the chances are you're not going to get to have that thing you want, that experience that you want. So keep that in mind, right? And now start by being truly honest with yourself. Start with yourself, right? And I think that's the hardest part, is really getting to know yourself, what it is that you want. And I think it's because we have this inner critic, this inner judge, that's really hard on ourselves when it comes to being vulnerable. So be honest with yourself and be compassionate with yourself. That's really important, that you not be hard on yourself over your true feelings, your true desires, your failures in life, your mistakes. You're human. We're all human. And if you're being really hard on yourself, you're making it harder to be human. It's already hard enough. So be compassionate, and then be compassionate with others when they're being vulnerable. Don't do the things that you're afraid of happening to you, right? So be kind when people are vulnerable. Let that be a connecting thing. Be compassionate for them. And then finally, decide, get really clear about what you want. Decide what it is you want, and then commit to pursuing it by taking courageous action. So vulnerability is courage. Take that courageous action. Go after what you want. And practice by starting with smaller things, maybe things that are a little bit less vulnerable, still vulnerable, but just maybe not quite as much, and work your way up to the bigger things. Practice is so important. We can learn all of these concepts and we go, oh, that's great, but nothing's going to change in your life until you start practicing, and practice regularly so that you actually start to get better at it. Right. And then, so one thing that could be very helpful is to get an accountability partner. I think this is always helpful in life, whatever goals we're working on. And so find somebody who you are close with and you trust, or maybe a professional, a coach, a therapist, and have them help you stay accountable while you're working on improving this skill for yourself. All right. Thank you, Jackson.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So Chris, just stay on the line while I will bring on the rest. I want to thank you again for being vulnerable. I know how the story of you and feeling that you're partly or largely responsible for a friend's death. Based from your sharing, I feel that right now being vulnerable is a tool that can help me get things instead of the negatives. All you have said is be vulnerable and go out and get everything that you want. And I will definitely, and I encourage the audience to also take on the steps that I think Chris have shared, basically with changing perspective and knowing that we can handle the tough things, whatever that comes from being vulnerable. Maybe thinking on the other part of what you lose, not being vulnerable, hence not getting the relationships that you want, and really starting from yourself and being honest with yourself. And lastly, to decide, and practice. Yes, that's right, practice. And accountability partner. And that sort of brought me this thought about, I think Simon Sinek was mentioning about him having his mastermind on this group of men, and the motto or the thing that was said was, you never cry alone. And I'm sure the Liverpool fans, or the soccer club, you never walk alone. So there's you never cry alone, that when you feel like crying, just reach out and cry with someone. So, okay, we have all the panelists right here with me, and let me look at the questions. And right, so we have a few questions here. I will read them out. So I want to thank all speakers here. All your stories of being vulnerable is making me look at how I'm closed and shut down. My wife says I need to be more vulnerable and booked me into this conference. How hilarious. I see I have a lot of work to do. Where do I start? So, Joon, maybe you would like to take this on?
Sure. That's always the toughest, right? Where do we begin? We don't have to be a scientist to be familiar with the concept of momentum, that once something's in motion, it's much easier, it takes less effort. So where do we begin? I think for me, one of the first places to begin is to be, and I believe it was, I don't remember who said it. There was so much good stuff, but it was to be honest with yourself. I think we are so good, even at fooling ourselves. And so to be honest with ourselves, and the words looking in the mirror comes to mind, because our nature is to first look outward. Why is this thing not working? What is the problem? We inherently look outward. When something goes wrong, and I hope this doesn't happen to all of you guys, but I know it happens out there somewhere, that in the workplace, when something goes wrong, the first place is you look outward and you identify all your employees, your colleagues, that they did wrong. But this is where also we need to look within ourselves. And I think, Jay, I loved it when you said relationships require two people. When it's just solo, yeah, I mean, I guess you can get all theoretical and say, well, I'm in a relationship with myself. And to some degree, we can get into that. But really, I would say start with yourself and be honest with yourself is a great first step. That's my final answer. I'm going to stick to that.
Your final answer sounds like the $1 million game. Is that your final answer? Any other panelists have anything to add?
I just want to say, whoever asked that question, like, you're here, that's a huge step, right? Because you could be doing any myriad of things. You chose to be here based off your wife's recommendation. You're listening to us. That's a huge step in the right direction. I know most of us here, I think we're all coaches. And, you know, one of the things that makes coaching so powerful, and the same would be for therapy, is that you have that safe space without judgment to be able to express yourself. Because there's a lot of people that I know in my life that I can go drink beer with, but if I told them, like, you know, my real problem, I'm not going to get good advice. We're good for drinking beer and talking about the Chiefs game and all that, but I'm not going to get good advice. So you got to know who in your circle can you go to. And that's why I think coaching is so powerful, because I know in my coaching practice, I've got, whether it be group or one-on-one, I've got that space where you can open up. And I don't think that a lot of people are aware of what's available to them. So I would encourage you that if you haven't explored that, you know, you got some coaches here, you got the whole Pay It Forward platform, a whole bench of coaches there that could provide you that space to be vulnerable and explore that. And I like what Chris said earlier. What's it costing you to not be vulnerable? What is it costing you? Because it's costing you a hell of a lot more than you realize.
I am going to go on to the next question. So there's a comment. Jay, thank you for your words. You do hard things. I do hard things because of you. Wow, that's great. You have changed my life. I love your podcast. Thank you for being so real here. And following that, I will go to the question that has been directed to Jay. So Jay, as a dad, I get worried when my son cries. Deep down, I do have beliefs that you just shared. Stop being a mama's boy. Stop crying. Be a man. Oh, sounds familiar. I can feel the fear gripping me sometimes that he's going to grow up as a wimp. I also feel ashamed to even write this. I wish I was more comfortable with my son crying. My daughter cries and I respond so differently. You have anything to comment on this, Jay?
So I have triplet daughters. I don't have a son. So I'm speaking from a father of triplet and they're teenagers now, they're 14. I'll say this is something, and this is what I've learned from, because I did have a father and it wasn't good. Don't be your child's first bully. You as a parent, do not be your child's first bully. And I think that we're so caught up in the culture of men need to be manly. I think that what I have learned, all that suppression of my own emotions has not done me a lot of service in my life. I think you can be a little, I think some, I don't want to say this. you got to walk that balance. We don't want to be wimpy. We don't want to capitulate when things get hard. Hence why you need to do hard things so you can kind of toughen yourself up to things. But I think that we can tend to way overdo it when it comes to our emotions. So how do you find balance in that? I think it's okay to let the child cry, but then, you probably like, why is the child crying? What are you trying to convey to them? And why? Anytime that I've had a tough conversation with my kids where it got maybe heated, I maybe have lost my temper, maybe there were tears, I always go back and circle the wagons back around when things have calmed down, when they have expressed themselves emotionally and I've expressed myself, and come back like, this is why this was important to me, and what do you think about that? And get their perspective. And that will hopefully mitigate some tears in the future. And I don't know, is this helpful? That's what I'm thinking of when I think of not being too harsh on your kids, because they're just children. But the long-term effects of that, if you don't reel that in, it could be detrimental to their ultimate development.
Thanks, Jay. I mean, when it comes to this question, personally, I have an eldest boy and 2 girls, and when we watch movies, especially those movies that are very touching, when I cry, and then I see this, my boy going around like, oh, mom is crying, oh, the girls are crying, like, dad, you're crying too, those are the opportunities for me that I walk the talk. And it's like, I just explained to him, crying is fine. There's nothing wrong with crying. And I think if you show them that it is all right to cry, and you normalize the fact that crying is fine, and you explain to them that, why it's just a feelings, it's a way of expressing, So I think if they see it once, twice, and that they feel more comfortable that it is okay to cry, then I think they'll grow up with a different idea that, this thought about stop crying, being a man, could be just so messed up thinking, So thank you. I'll go on to the next question. So Bryan, there's a comment for you that someone wants to hear you sing along to Mariah Carey. All right, so someone must know your ability to sing. Maybe one day then. And we have a question here that is related to animal, and since you're the only one with a cat, the question is, do animals exhibit vulnerability, or is this a human thing? So Bryan?
Let's address the Mariah Carey thing first. Absolutely, I will see you. You do not want to hear me sing. I tell people the only musical instrument that I can play is the radio, and I suck at that too. So I am not musically talented. But when it comes to animals, I believe they do have their own vulnerability. Like, you could see this in dogs and cats, like when they're cowering, or things like that when we're reprimanding them and stuff like that. Like, I growing up, we had outdoor cats, and then when I switched to indoor cats, when I started dating my now wife and stuff like that, I probably wasn't the greatest at that. I believe I've hit the cat, and I'm admitting that, but you could see it, and it brought the emotion out in me. And like, what did I just do to this poor animal who's just like defenseless and stuff like that? But you could certainly see that, with dogs. I see it a lot with dogs out in the world when they show these videos of this homeless dog or whatever, and they catch it, and it's so afraid. I mean, it's snapping at him, and it's just aggressive. And then they get this poor animal in, and they start to show it love and affection. And then they shear off all the crap that's on it and stuff, and then all of a sudden, they'll show it like 3 weeks later, and this dog is just loving and stuff. So yeah, I think that animals definitely can show vulnerability too, and they have it. There's such a connection there that we've lost, but yeah, I do.
Great, thanks. So I see, Joon, you have your electronic hand up.
Yes, I have to share just 10 seconds, everyone. When I saw that question, it's so fascinating, right? I work in education. My background science, and so immediately my instinct was no, animals do not voluntarily show vulnerability. But then listening to Bryan talk about the cat, and are there examples that I could think of? And you know what? We have a dog. We have a family dog. And the most vulnerable part of a quadruped, so animals with four legs, is their belly. Their abdomen is their most vulnerable part of their body. And you know what our dog does? She runs to us and to strangers who come to the house, and she lies down on her back and she expects a belly rub. That is a specific illustration of a voluntary act of vulnerability. So I'm going to have to change my answer. And thank you so much for sharing that, Bryan, because I now see that animals can voluntarily choose to be vulnerable. So thank you.
Thanks, June. Chris, I would direct this question to you. It could be for you anyway. So the question is, have you lost any friends along the way? And obviously you have. And I go to men's circle and it feels safe to show my emotions in these places. When I'm in the real world, I have to wear the suit and tie and put aside any feelings. I worry that if I show up with emotions in the office, that I'll be seen as weak or not capable. So Chris, you would like to comment on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, you know what? I actually have lost a friend, a close friend of mine, because of this. Not the one that I lost in high school, but after high school when I was in my early 20s, because I've always been a little bit more of an emotional man, a little bit more sensitive maybe than the average boy and man. And I had a very close friend who grew up with a father who taught him that a man was, you know, like all these, you know, maybe more traditional ideas or definitions of what a man, you know, a man is tough, a man works on a car, a man has this physically demanding job, a man cusses and smokes cigarettes and drinks beer. Like this was his idea of what a man was. And I worked in an office and I was sensitive and emotional and even depressed and anxious at times. And he kind of, even though we were close friends and were for a long time, he kind of bullied me over this stuff about me being vulnerable, really is what it came down to. And ultimately I had to decide to end that friendship because of where he was and where I was, and it just wasn't working. So know that it might happen by being vulnerable, but is that somebody you actually want to have in your life as a friend? You want somebody who's going to bully you and make it not okay for you to be honest about your feelings and about who you are and about your hopes and dreams in life. If you have a friend who isn't okay with you, the real you, then I would have to question that friendship.
Thanks, Chris. Any other people in the panelists would like to add on or comment?
I think what Chris just said, like, who do you want in your circle? Do you want those types of people around you? And having the courage to close that, you got to protect your space. You've got to protect your space, and you get to pick and choose who's in your space. And one thing I've learned is everyone's got a volume button. Not everyone gets the same amount of points when it comes to assessing points to their opinion. And some people, you got to turn the volume down. Like, your opinion just doesn't matter to me because you're an ass. And I don't, you're just mean. Like, why? I'm not going to accept the gift of your judgment because nothing you say matters. Now, these people over here that are in my corner, they clap when I win. Those are the people I want around me. And so it kind of goes back to who you're surrounded with. And so that's the only thing I would echo.
Good. Thanks, Jake.
I'd like to add on to that too, just because of the last part of the question. He's talking about showing off emotions in the office and being seen as weak or not capable. I think we need to have a cultural shift there, a paradigm shift when it comes to being human in the office. Work, business, that's part of life. This is all life. We're all human beings. We're not robots or machines going into work. So I think we need to start shifting toward showing human emotions. And so maybe take the opportunity to take the lead in your place of business. And does that mean yell and cry out loud and throw a chair across the room because you're emotional? No. So we have to express our emotions in a way that is appropriate and acceptable and non-threatening to others. So express your truth, right? But in a more controlled, appropriate way. But you don't have to suppress the truth. And I think that we should all take the lead in being our true emotional human selves at work or otherwise.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris. So June, maybe this next question will go to you. Well, I guess it will go to you. When something goes wrong, like something breaks in the house, I just get so angry. The other day, this happened, and my son said to take 3 breaths. I did, and I started crying. I was surprised by my tears. Why does anger show up so much faster than the tears?
Oh, wow. Thank you for that question. I think there's actually a physiological, a scientific explanation. Anger releases a lot of endorphins. And these strong hormones basically serve as anesthesia. So, anger. So, for example, when one is taking acting classes, right? I don't know if anyone here is taking acting classes, but I haven't either. But I know several people. I live in Los Angeles, so I know several people who are in the industry. And when one is taking acting lessons, no one needs to learn to really know how to express anger. It's just one of the emotions on the spectrum that is pretty natural and easy for most of us to be able to express. That anger serves as a very powerful anesthetic purpose. We use it. It's easily elicited, and it serves a certain degree of benefit. And again, there's a lot of things that we've all heard the expression, everything in moderation. We don't want to use anger too often because, again, anger by itself, when it's contained and it's regulated, can be quite beneficial. But the problem with anger is that it's like a fire, right? Fire is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. I mean, a fire to put my s'mores with my family and kids over a campfire is great. But when that fire cannot be controlled, and that's what it sounds like here, and I think all of us could relate. And if anyone here in the audience or out in the universe says they have always controlled their fire, aka their anger, I'm gonna know that person is not completely honest individual, because we have all experienced that, where that anger just kind of got out of control. And this is where, again, it's about self-regulation. It's about knowing ourselves, right? I work with primarily college age, graduate level students, and they frequently talk about knowing themselves, discovering themselves, right? As we are getting older, we do learn more about ourselves. And so anger is just one of those things where it's very difficult to regulate. But again, just like everything in life, you get better with practice. And one of the first things you need to recognize is the true nature of that anger. And it sounds to me like you get it, that it's not something you can let it go unchecked, because it can become so big. And in this case, it led to tears. And I don't know if this is a scientific reason, but tears are liquid, and liquids could put out fire. So maybe that's just a way that it sort of culminates. But yeah, I mean, I thank you for sharing about that, because in fact, I'm working with my coach. And that's another thing that we all learn from being connected to others. And so anger is my sort of drug of choice. It could be the most silliest things, but you're right. I mean, our kids do something and they spill. Oh my gosh, for God forbid, they spill something. My reaction, I can control that, or I want to work on that, because anger, like I said, is just way too easy and it comes natural. So hopefully that was helpful. Anybody else here? Nobody else here struggles with anger, right? I just want to make sure. Okay, good.
Yes, right.
Yeah, for me, the instant when I saw that question or statement on there, my instant was the same as June's. There's scientific reason for it. To me, it's a survival thing. Like getting angry, which gets the testosterone and gets all that stuff going because you feel like you're being attacked. One of the things that I like to see anger as is like somebody's just broken our rules or our God, what's the other word for it? Yeah, just broken our rules. Like when somebody cuts you off in traffic, you immediately get angry because it's your rule that you shouldn't cut somebody off in traffic or whatever, but we immediately get defensive. And so it's like this primal instinct, like you're attacking me. And whether that's emotionally or physically, we're built to survive. And so that's why the anger comes first. And then when we're able to slow down the fire, so to speak, then we can express the tears and stuff like that. But I think it's just a natural instant reaction, like, oh, what did you say? Or something like that. So that it's just so fast. I think it's just built into our genetic system for us to survive.
Jay, maybe we can do the next one. So I can relate to being very shy when others give me public praise. There is a deep fear of being an imposter, I believe. How can I trust others' opinion of me when I don't trust myself? My partner, she says that I could maybe get some tips from you all today. Jay?
Oh, so in the military culture, we do not do a good job of acknowledging our accomplishments. So I've been in the Army for the last 27 years, and it's always, the military does a really good job of creating leaders, and they do this by pushing people, and you have to go from one school to the next, whether it be military or civilian education, but it's just like, you achieve one thing, and it's like, okay, what's next? When you go on to the next thing. I vividly recall when I was enlisted for many years, I became an officer. And in a short amount of time, I went to officer candidate school. I went to the engineer basic officer leadership course. I finished up my bachelor degree, and it was like, as soon as I was out of school, it was like, when are you going to your master's? As a captain, you go to your captain's career course, you get your master's. And I went to Missouri S&T. I wear this hat, Missouri S&T. It's a very prominent engineering school. And because my undergrad was not in engineering, many of the engineer officers they were civil engineers. I went to the geological engineering program, and they called it the Rocks for Jocks. And they almost like downgraded the program because I wasn't one of the smart engineers. I was, I didn't have my undergrad. And it was like, okay, and as soon as you graduate that, it's like, okay, what's next? And I just remember like looking back, and when I tell people that are here in Missouri or other engineers, like they're very impressed with that degree plan. I was almost embarrassed to tell my Army colleagues, like, yeah, I did the geological engineering, because that was for the not smart engineers, right? Because we didn't have all the undergrad requirements. And it just spoke to the culture of the military. And it woke me up to, you know what, I need to slow down and celebrate my wins more. Celebrate the wins. And I think culturally, this has become a problem where we don't slow down and celebrate our accomplishments. And we need to be able to do that. That's where you find true fulfillment. We're always looking for the next thing, the next thing. You're always finding yourself chasing something. And that's what I found in my life. I was chasing all of these things and never finding true fulfillment, because I was always accomplish something and go right on to the next thing, accomplish something, go right on to the next thing. And when I slowed down to start smelling the roses, if you will, a little bit, like I found a little bit more fulfillment and joy and happiness in my life. And so I think that's something that we need to do. Did I answer the question, or there's a second part of that question I think I might have missed?
I think you're good. There's a question for Chris. Chris, as a manager, how can I start this cultural paradigm shift in my office? I guess it's referring to maybe being vulnerable, to the question that you answered just now about showing emotions and not being seen as weak or capable?
Right. Yeah. Great question. Thank you for that. I say it always starts, here with yourself by showing up, being more vulnerable, being more open and honest about the human side of you. We all have emotions, we all have feelings. So start by sharing yourself, and then by giving your employees the opportunity to do so. Maybe have some meetings with them individually, ask them questions about themselves, how they're doing, let them know that there's no right or wrong answer. They're not going to get in trouble for how they answer, but really find out how they are, and encourage them to share. Maybe you can do some team building exercises, some different trainings, or even fun things that you can put together to help the team start to share more with each other, start to trust each other, open up to each other more. I don't have any specific examples of exercises, and maybe some of the other panelists here do, but I would say there are plenty of exercises or games that you can play as a team to start building this trust and open communication, and starting to really encouraging this side of things.
Okay, anyone else have any comments or ideas?
Speaking from the aspect of having a restaurant for 10 years and trying to create a better culture, I remember not being a very good manager, so to speak, at the very beginning. My wife came up to me and was like, "Did you just hear the way you talk to that?" And I'd be like, "What are you talking about?" And I made a few people cry in those earlier days. I just didn't know how to communicate, stuff like that. So I think in the coaching world, we try to create this container for our client to be able to trust and to be able to express themselves. And so in order to create that container of trust, you have to be able to be vulnerable yourself. So it starts with being able to share certain personal things and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be necessarily in a group environment. You can, but individually. I know the 1 Minute Manager was a really good book for me. Praise somebody when they do something well, and then tell somebody when they do something wrong, but do it immediately. Don't wait 10 days afterwards. And when you start doing that repeatedly, that shows that, hey, when Bryan comes to talk to me, he's not just getting mad at me. He's not just going to yell at me. The other day, he came up and said I did something good, and then the other day he said I did something bad, good. So it's not this, all of a sudden Bryan's coming up to me to say that I messed up, or I did something wrong. So that's how you can do it. You start by your actions and stuff, and by creating that container of trust that they are willing to be able to step into and say, wow, Bryan was honest, Bryan was open, Bryan shared parts of him that were like, oh wow, I didn't expect him to share that. And so that gives them the open door to say, hey, I can share something too. If he was willing to be open and honest about something that troubled him in his life or something like that, then I can too. So I hope that helps.
I'm going to add 5 seconds to that. When you're the manager, you're in a position of leadership. You're a position of authority. So they're going to look to you. And so this is where, again, the quickest way to destroy any credibility and influence that you have as a leader is hypocrisy. So I love what Bryan said. It starts with you. You have to start that and model for that, for your team, what that looks like. So they'll follow you. And so again, we go right back to the whole theme of this entire session today is to be a manager. It needs to start with you, which means you're going to have to take a risk. And that means being vulnerable. It's not easy. Vulnerability is not easy. And so kudos to all of you for spending your time joining us here when we're talking about vulnerability. So
good. How time passed so quickly. I'm just looking at the clock. We have a couple of minutes left. I just want to have this question that I've had in mind. I heard from a friend that the suicide rate amongst in the UK during COVID period was highest for men. And I just want to ask the panelists maybe a quick answer, like how do we detect or help someone, specifically for men who is having challenges, and in showing vulnerability and hence maybe suffering in silence? So anyone, quick answers?
I'll jump on. The first thing that I could say is find somebody that you could reach out to. Like, one of the obstacles that I forgot to mention earlier of being able to surpass this barrier is, like, who can I even reach out to and talk to? Like, can I reach out to, my friends or my dad or my spouse or a loved one? But who is the one that you would be most willing to open up to? And the second one would be to invest in just your own emotional IQ. Like, what is the relationship you have with yourself? What's the conversation you have with yourself? How are you treating yourself? What are the kinds of things you say to yourself? Would you say that to your best friend, or would you say that to a spouse? And start to explore that conversation. Why am I treating myself this way? Why am I so down on myself? And explore that one. But the first is that I would, when those emotions start to come up, you're so used to suppressing them, find somebody to engage with. That shame lessens when we share it. Like, shame loses its grip when we're able to share it, because when you start sharing it, shame's like, wait, what are you doing? I had this hold on you. And then when you start to share it, it completely loses its grip.
Bryan, aren't you talking about fear and the clown? Like, the more you release the fear. That's great. I love how you just explained that.
Okay. Anyone else? Short comment? Jay?
I was gonna say, it's getting in conversation with people. I know in my space, with the veteran space, there's a big push for doing 22 push-ups a day. Instead of doing 22 push-ups a day, why don't you reach out to someone every day? And I know there was an awareness campaign, but the point is we're doing a lot of awareness, but really what needs to happen is the connection to other people. And make sure that you check on your strong friends, because there's a lot of people that are suffering in silence. They put a big wall up that they're doing well, and they're lonely. Especially, I work with a lot of people at leadership, business leaders. It's lonely at the top. It's lonely at the top, and those are the people that we need to make sure that they're doing okay. And that really comes through making an effort, being intentional, and developing those relationships with people. So it's hard to tell. It really is hard to tell, but it's all about connection, reaching out to people. Just showing some appreciation to someone can go a long way.
Good. All right. So we are right on time. I believe there are some other questions that we could not answer. I would encourage the audience and everyone who wants to have their question answered to go to Life Coach University website, askacoach.tv, and we will have the answers there. I would like to thank all the men here for showing your vulnerability. And I hope the audience, I also want to thank all of you for joining us this evening, this afternoon, or in the morning, very early for some of you in the West Coast. So appreciate all of you coming today. And I hope you had a great session and have a good day and good week ahead. Take care. Bye.